That was beautiful, thank you. This is the first time that I've done anything in the chapel for 16 months, so it's really, really special. And I'm very proud to open this evening's Contemplation, which is a celebration of pride, the self-affirmation, dignity and equality of everyone who is lesbian, gay, bisexual or transsexual. I'm particularly pleased that this celebration is taking place in our non-denominational chapel, which welcomes people of every faith and none. Founded in 1879, the college had no chapel for the first 55 years of its existence, but a strong-minded ecumenist donor then produced funds for such a building. And this was agreed under the condition that it was to be a house of prayer for all peoples. I interpret that as people of every background, culture, country, faith, and of course, sexual identity. And I love the fact that this phrase is carved in stone above the entrance. For me, this is a symbol of inclusion and of our unofficial motto of including the excluded, which seeks to challenge the status quo and ensure that everyone is not only welcome in our college, but they're free to be themselves, to be proud of who they are. In the last 140 years, we've had many LGBT students, especially lesbians, as we were a women's college until 1994. But of course, being a lesbian was never illegal. I hope that in 2021, with all the huge advantages that have been made in equality in this country, and in which I've played a small campaigning and legislative part, the LGBT students and staff really can come out and be proud at Somerville. I'm so impressed by our LGBT students and the role that they play throughout the university. I realise, however, that for some people there will still be challenges in college, at home or in the workplace, and that we haven't fully addressed the appalling stigma that still exists in some pockets of society. We will all know of young people who are carrying the unbearable burden of not being able to be true to themselves, who are too frightened to take the daunting step to come out. We've still much to do to educate, to destigmatise and to give people confidence. For trans people, the problem is particularly acute. They're having a terrible time. And as a community and as a country, we still have a long way to go to reach real inclusion. Sadly, there are also problems within the LGBT community. And according to a Stonewall report in 2018, half of Black, Asian and minority ethnic LBG people in the UK have experienced some form of discrimination or treatment from others in their local LGBT community because of their ethnicity. The theme of this year's Oxford Pride is Inclusion Matters. It was chosen as a reminder that the movement exists due to the actions of marginalised members of our community and how this is sometimes not honoured or remembered. As we celebrate huge progress, we must continue to campaign for inclusion and equality in our country, both to advance rights and to ensure that they're not diminished in any way. There have been remarkable challenges and changes in my lifetime. Mind you, I'm quite old. The 1967 Sexual Offences Act that decriminalised sexual acts between men over the age of 21 in England and Wales, the first gay pride rally in 1972, the 1980s when gay men faced the horror of HIV/AIDS and the appalling stigmatisation which gave rise to Section 28. With the founding of Stonewall by the extraordinary Michael Cashman, Sir Ian McKellen and Lisa Power, and the campaigning and advocacy that followed, Conservative, Labour and the coalition government were persuaded of the need for increased equality in what must be a just society. There's still need for change, to embrace new opportunities, and I hope that the sense of community and the recalibration of societal values that we appear to be experiencing in this country as a result of the pandemic will continue, despite the immense social and economic impact of COVID. We must also redouble our efforts internationally, remembering that LGBT plus people should be free, safe and equal everywhere. It should never be illegal to be you. Yet in 69 countries around the world, LGBT people are criminalised and persecuted because of who they are and who they love. Today, I've forgotten I was going to wear a rainbow rose badge, the network promoting LGBTI rights in Europe. In my last job, I was very active in the network, and I should do more now, especially as LGBT rights in Hungary and Poland are being assaulted. Whilst we are sadly no longer a member of the EU, we should be deeply concerned about the retrenchment of human rights on our continent. We're so very fortunate in many ways. As a consequence of being in Oxford, no matter our background, we're all privileged and powerful, and we should use that power to bring about meaningful and lasting change. Allies play a vital role, and sometimes our support is more powerful when we use our voices to be advocates for people who are experiencing other forms of discrimination or who are campaigning for other rights. We should look for the difference, listen to the difference, and whenever appropriate, we should act. We've got many treats in store this evening, reflections, poems, and 4 beautiful pieces of music performed by our choir, our organists, and also a trumpeter. 1 piece is by a trans composer, 1 by a lesbian, and 2 by gay men. Enjoy this celebration of pride, of diversity and inclusion. Be confident, be proud of who you are, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer or straight. Together, we can ensure that we have a truly inclusive community where difference is respected, where friendships flourish, which enable you to focus on your academic work so that you reach your full potential, and which gives us all strength in these difficult times. I hope that it will also give you confidence as you go out into the world to bring about the changes that are needed. Enjoy, and thank you for being here.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Katie, and I'm one of the 2 LGBTQ+ representatives of Somerville MCR alongside Isaac. And we've been working together all year to organise things for the LGBTQ+ postgraduate students. I want to reflect briefly today on our overarching theme of community and how that fits in with Pride. As part of my undergrad here at Somerville, I went on a year abroad, most of which was spent in France. I was working in a rural town in the Loire Valley, and I took the train to Tours as often as possible to be in a bigger city. I had met and made friends with a few other English speakers in Tours who were doing similar programs to mine, teaching English in French schools. One of these friends was a girl called Sarah. One evening, very near the end of my time in France, I was in Tours to meet up with the assistants there and probably to say goodbye to them because I was leaving soon after. The others hadn't arrived yet, and it was just me and Sarah chatting. Over the course of our discussion, she dropped some little clue into the conversation. I don't remember what it was now, but some comment that made me ask her if she was also bisexual. My phrasing here was purposeful, and I could see her relief when she realized there was someone else there that she could relate to on that level. She told me that she hadn't had anyone openly bi around her for a few years and was desperate to talk about it with someone who understood. We talked for a while about how bisexuality is often portrayed in the media, about the stereotypes, about bi-erasure. It was a good conversation. Then the others arrived and the topic changed. I didn't think much more of it, apart from the fact that I was happy to have been able to provide something she obviously needed in the form of someone she could relate to. After I left France and returned home, Sarah sent me a letter. I had only met up with her a handful of times over the months I spent in France, but she wrote to me to tell me again how much it had meant to her to see an aspect of herself reflected back at her through someone else. What we uncovered during that half-hour conversation was, one could argue, that we both belonged to a particular community, a community which was certainly underrepresented in that location at that point in time. While I was living in the Loire, I heard that a pride parade had been planned for a nearby city and had subsequently been cancelled due to the public outcry against it. Finding out that you share something like that in an environment where it is not necessarily welcomed can certainly be a bonding experience. This evening, we're celebrating Pride, and we are celebrating Somerville's LGBTQ+ community. I feel honoured to have been one of the LGBTQ+ reps this year and to have shared this role with Isaac. Being part of this community at Somerville is a far cry from the experience that Sarah and I shared of being two odd examples of otherness in a relatively unfriendly environment. I've always felt comfortable in this college being and expressing exactly who I am. I hope that through the roles of future Somervillians, the situation will only improve. To me, my story about Sarah is bittersweet. In an ideal world, it wouldn't have meant so much to her that I was open about my own sexuality, because there never would have been any issue with her being open about her own in the first place. Nevertheless, it is a happy story of finding understanding and acceptance, and it's an evening I remember fondly. I hope that Somervillians continue to find that same understanding and acceptance here, and feel supported and valued within the college environment. Thank you, and happy Pride Month.
Afternoon, everyone. My name is Isaac, and alongside Katie, I'm the other LGBTQ+ representative for Somerville's MCR. It's a real joy to speak to you all today, and what a marvellous setting too in this serene place. While all college chapels are open to everyone, I don't know if any of us are truly a house for all peoples quite like Somerville's. It's marvellous that so many of our community can be here today and online to share the experience. Community that includes the excluded, like Somerville's, however, is not always so easy to come by. Who amongst us hasn't questioned whether they'll find their people at some point or other in their lives? I'm new to Oxford this year, but before coming, I was fortunate to see some examples firsthand where queer community can spring up and persevere in even the most unusual settings. I did my master's at the other place, and one day I received a slightly mysterious request from a choral friend. One of the churches in Cambridge was having a rainbow compline. For those that don't know, a compline is a traditional service late at night that marks the ending of the day. My friend asked if I could possibly help find some singers for a small scratch choir to accompany the service. Well, that evening came, and our small gaggle of hastily assembled singers turned up, slightly surprised to find it would be taking place in a Catholic chapel. In the corner, a rainbow flag carefully positioned against a wall. In the congregation, small clumps of people spread out, not dissimilar to how we're seated here in this place. Some regular, some very much not. A Catholic priest gave a supportive address, and before we knew it, it was over. The attendees of this word-of-mouth gathering departing silently into the night, one bright rainbow needle and thread visible for but a moment before it plunged silently and invisibly into the fabric of the church once more. It was a powerful thing to behold. Another example lingers in my mind, though I admit it must sound slightly eclectic as backstories go. I used to work for the Army Reserve before I started my DPhil. I was a musician. I played the flute, but as part of my role, I was attached to an infantry regiment based near where I did my undergraduate studies. While the Army has certainly made great strides with regards to training and diversity in recent years, it is still a very homogenous environment, in infantry regiments especially. As part of my role, I even had to do Phase 1 training, and I'm ever so slightly ashamed to say I hid my bisexuality throughout that part of the process. I self-censored my perceived differences, misgendered my previous partners, as so many have before. Where does one find the courage in an institution as vast and indomitable as the armed forces, an organisation that is centred around hierarchy and obedience? Where does one find the courage to be and live as one truly is, when there's no clear example around you? Clear is the key word here. In my laziness, I looked at a room full of my camouflaged colleagues and saw only my own stereotypes reflected back at me. One of my close acquaintances, someone I would never have imagined, was actually in a relationship with another soldier of the same sex. I would later go on to play at their wedding, as did the whole band in full military dress. Another member was homosexual and had been around since the time where the ban on homosexuality was first lifted, all but invisible to me. So, what's the take-home message from these anecdotes? Well, in these institutions particularly, there are widely held beliefs in the public's minds about how compatible they can be with queerness. Even I, a witness to the events I describe, continually have to challenge my own assumptions on these particular matters, the army especially. There's always work to be done, of course, when it comes to advancing an agenda of equality. This pride is surely one of the most political for some time with regards to the issues of the day and what we see happening to communities around the world. But hopefully, I can end with a truly positive note. No matter how challenging our circumstances, no matter the attitudes of the institutions and groups we may find ourselves in, LGBTQ+ community does seem to find a way. Surely then, that's a source of inspiration for us all.
It's hard to write a poem about being gay. How do you portray all the complexity? The hard-won and fire-forged identity, the individual stories, the community.
It's not easy to express the relief when you're greeted with acceptance or similarity, not made to feel like some strange foreign rarity, not separated by some huge disparity.
It's simple, though, to spot that well-known joy and the sudden sense of safety and security, born of recognition, familiarity, when what separates us from some can bring us family.
It's lovely, though, to find sweet understanding, to celebrate with peers our pride with levity.
To stand with our siblings, to fight for true equality, to push for changes that will have longevity. I am proud to be a part of this community, so full of love and talent, creativity, so worthy of respect and rights and parity, so varied, full of color, strength and beauty.
We remember all those who came before. We recall their struggles against animosity. We are grateful for their courage and their bravery. We stop their names from fading to obscurity.
We take their gifts to us and hold them close. We love each other fiercely, with sincerity. We stand together, joined in solidarity. We work to carve out happiness and prosperity.
It's hard to write a poem about being gay. We might look back to past figures of authority.
Those who came before and peopled history, who left their mark, though how to do so subtly.
This poem is a love song to my friends, who've helped me as I've grown into maturity, who've given me the chance and opportunity to share the joy and meaning of true unity.
Our theme for this term's choral contemplation events was communities, and I couldn't be more proud to have dedicated the last event before the Leavers service in celebration of Pride Month. Each Sunday when I first step up to the lectern, I spend a few minutes, sometimes more than a few, giving meaning and context to each event. But today was unique because given the brilliance of the program so far, it just hasn't left me very much else to say, other than thanks. I first and foremost thank our college principal, who despite her very busy diary took the time to deliver her opening remarks for a very special choral contemplation event. Most noteworthy from her remarks was the idea of recalibrating our values. This is something I'll remember and reflect upon. I thank Katie and Isaac, two fantastic members of the MCR, for taking the initiative on this and for allowing me to make it part of our choral contemplation program. On the side of music, I thank the choir and organ scholars every week, actually, for the wonderful music they've been consistently producing, which we have all taken for granted now. But what you'll hear after I finish, two interlinked French folk melodies with Melissa on the organ, Finlay on the trumpet, and Franco with the flute, is really quite special. So please do make sure you don't miss that. But I cannot make way for them without saying a few words about the very special poem, Community, which we all just heard. It communicates a sense of true unity in our fundamental, very fundamental value of equality and freedom in love. A few weeks before the event, I had scanned several religious, spiritual, and cultural texts and thought of sharing quotes from each one of these, which directly support the fundamental values I just referred to. But I was left speechless when I received the text of the poem just a few days before the event. Upon reading, I felt quotes, verses cited from primary texts might help someone interested in the technicalities of the value I mentioned, particularly in a political arena. But if you want to understand true love, raw emotions, and feelings of togetherness, then it simply cannot outclass a poem that's clearly written with utmost sincerity and clearly filled with strong emotions. Amongst everything, I felt the convincing sincerity of it is what stands out. My heartfelt gratitude to the Somervillian who took the time to write for the chapel. Thank you very much for your contribution. Now, next week, we will meet again for one final time before we disperse for the summer break, for the traditional event of Leavers Service, which is specifically intended for the finalists and graduates who are finishing this year. I know JCR and MCR presidents have been working hard on their remarks, so please do make sure you attend or tune in online to hear from them. I shall now pass it over to Melissa, Finlay, and Franco for the closing performance of today's event.